Hello, everybody. Yeah, echoes. Great. Thank you all for being here. If you haven't yet, please take this opportunity to sign in. And also thank you for bearing with us while we were having some technical difficulties. Is there an echo?
You're fine from my perspective.
Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
Okay. I will just turn my ears off. Okay. Welcome to the Hart Fellowship. I can't do that.
Okay, yeah,
I'm so sorry. Welcome to the Hart Fellowship Information Session. My name is Lee Adelblue. I'm the Program Coordinator for the Hart Leadership Program. And today with me I have Professor Andrew Nurkin, who is the Director of the program as well. Has everyone had a chance to scan the QR code? Okay, great. So, what is the Hart Fellowship? Presumably you are here because you know a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and walk through. So, the Hart Fellowship is a 10-month postgraduate research fellowship for recent Duke or DKU graduates. It is focused on community-based research and being immersed in a local community, doing research and direct service in some area that has to do with social, political, or humanitarian issues. So, today we're going to run through kind of the 4 components of the fellowship and then also talk about some of the application details. And then we will have a time at the end for questions, but you can also email me into office hours if your questions aren't addressed. So, in our fellowship we have 4 basic components. The fellows community, so that would be you, ideally. Direct service and community partners, community-based research, and reflective practice and leadership development. So I'll run through all of these in more detail, but just to kind of give you a preview, our Hart Fellows can be students from any major, any background who are interested in doing community-based research. You will do that with a community partner who you find that is working in an area that you already are passionate about, on issues that you're passionate about, and you can go anywhere in the world. So it can be a domestic policy issue, domestic humanitarian issue, or you can go to a different country. Alongside working with a community partner, you'll also be doing community-based research. That means that you are, in one lane working with your community partner, doing whatever work they need in their offices or in the field, but then also on the side, you're kind of engaging in your community and creating your own research project. Finally, we have reflective practice as leadership development. So this is kind of a core aspect of any Hart leadership program. Do you want to say more about that? Or?
Yeah, well, when we get to that also.
Okay, great. So, Hart Fellows are not all from the same major, interested in the same topic, nor are they pursuing the same careers. Anyone can be a Hart Fellow. We want to see you in your application and not an inauthentic guess at what our ideal candidate is. So when you're working through your application, make sure that you're focused on what you're passionate about, what skills and talents you bring to the table, even if you're not sure that they are directly applicable. We want to see who you are.
Yeah.
However, our Hart Fellows do tend to share some specific qualities. So the first would be an openness to new experiences, to new cultures, and to new ways of being a leader. They are curious, they are thoughtful communicators, engaged in community. Our Hart Fellows are often self-reflective, enthusiastic, respectful, and imaginative. And I will also add to this that they have a lot of cultural humility.
So when we think about, we're going to talk about the application process in greater detail, but when we think about kind of what are the characteristics over the past, I think this is the 26th year of our fellowship, so we're starting doing that. So when we think about what we've learned over that time, is that the individuals who tend to really get the most out of this experience are those who are really open to what the experience has to teach them, and maybe come up with some expectations, right? We all have expectations about what is going to happen to us in the future, but are willing to have those expectations challenged and reworked and rewritten in conversation with our community. Related to that, I think, is strong sense, and this is something we're going to want to see in your application, so think about the experiences you've had that might help demonstrate this. The strong sense of resilience. Right? You can be in a place that seems different, when it challenges you, or that is going to stretch your imagination in some way, and that you won't shrink from those challenges, but you'll meet them and show resilience. So some of that is going to be what we look for in the application, in part because you're spending a year, ideally, in a community that you don't particularly know very well. You will have some anchoring relationships there, but it's not going to. We haven't yet had a Hart Fellow who's gone back to the place that they're from, like their hometown, to do that work. It's generally in a place that's going to feel so new. And whether that's in the US or in another country around the world, that experience is going to challenge you. And so we want to see that you have the wherewithal and the resilience to make the most out of that challenge and learn deeply about yourself. Which is a long way of saying those 8 things.
Thank you. So when it comes to eligibility, here are the people who are eligible and not eligible. Basically, recent Duke graduates, whether it's 2022, 2023, or if you're graduating in May 2024. This includes international students and alumni, DACA recipients, and undocumented students or alumni. You are not eligible if you graduated from Duke or DKU before 2022. If you are a graduate from a Duke graduate or professional program, this is really targeted for undergraduate students or postgrads. You cannot already have an advanced degree, and you cannot have graduated from a different undergraduate university. Pretty straightforward. When it comes to our fellowship funding, there are a few things that we cover. So when you are assigned, when you become a fellow, we will work with you through the spring semester until your launch date to develop a budget for your time on the ground. So that budget will cover your living expenses, and then there are some other things that we cover. So we will purchase your flight to and from your location, first at the beginning of your fellowship, and then back home at the end. There's also a stipend for some research-associated costs. So if there was specific equipment that you needed, what's an example of that?
This can range from like documentary equipment. If you're doing a documentary project, we've had folks that do sort of community engaged survey work where we're compensating participants in that survey in some way that feels equitable and honorable. So kind of those costs that might be associated with the research itself.
Yeah. And then lastly, there's a small stipend if you need to do a little bit of language training for your location. So those 2, 3, and 4 are kind of outside your regular stipend. The budget that you build will determine how much you make. Yeah.
And just a word about the living expenses, and we'll, of course, feel free to ask questions about this. The stipend is designed to support your year in a frugal but sustainable way, right? So you're able to support your basic living expenses, and it's every year there's kind of a variety of small questions like, can I buy this couch off Craigslist? And of course you can, as long as it's not a very expensive couch, right? So we negotiate some of that in terms of how to make this stipend stretch across 18 months. It is designed to be sustainable. It's not, a huge amount of money, but it's enough for you to live on.
Right. And the way that this works is, so you'll design your budget, you'll get a cash payment twice throughout your fellowship, once at the beginning and then once at that halfway point. And throughout your 10 months, you'll submit receipts to our finance manager, and she'll record those, and those will be it's just a way to decrease your tax liability. Yeah, the purpose of the receipts is not to monitor your expenses. There are some things that the university does not allow the stipend to be spent on. Which would be all obvious things, right? Nothing that's against the law of the United States or a country that you're living in. But your basic living expenses are covered. We do the receipt reporting because this is considered taxable income, even though you're not an employee of the university, nor are you an employee of the organization where you're working in most cases.
you're a stipended postgraduate fellow. That means that you're getting all of the money up front and not holding any taxes. But if you are paying taxes in the United States, the Internal Revenue Service will want to know kind of something about that money. Duke has a process with which they can actually reduce your tax burden if you submit the receipt. So it's not about monitoring what you're spending money on or like, oh, that was, you spent too much on groceries this week. It's about making sure that Duke is sending a letter to the IRS when it comes time for your tax returns that reduces that liability. So that's a service that the university provides for you. We've gotten questions over the years of why do I have to submit all of my expenses? It's not about kind of checking up on you, it's about making sure that you don't have to pay more taxes than businesses.
All right. So our next section, community partners and direct service. And hopefully you can read through that. And also I apologize that the mouse is on the screen. So a community partner is a community-based organization with which the fellow will perform direct service and conduct research. They're often small grassroots NGOs, but they've also included government organizations, university research centers, among other different types of organizations. How do you choose a community partner? So when you're putting together your application, we ask you to not only have a topic in mind that you'd like to engage with during your fellowship, but to have some idea of the location that you would like to be in and the organization that you would like to work with. In general, we ask fellows or applicants to make exploratory contact with a few organizations that might match, just to kind of make sure that they would be open to having you as a fellow. But also, after you're accepted into the program, there will be time to finalize those commitments, and sometimes things change. Yeah.
On that note, you don't have to have a host organization finalized by the time. It is helpful for the review committee to have some sense that the organization you want to work with wants to work with you. Now, obviously, you can't go and commit and say, I'm going to be our fellow, because that's not the case yet. But you might reach out and say, like, hey, I'm applying for this fellowship. If I were successful, would you be a proposal? That conversation tends to be a little easier with an organization you may already have some connection to. But we totally acknowledge you may want to work with an organization that you've never encountered, you don't know. You can have an exploratory conversation with them or not. I do think it is more helpful if you can build the case that this is an organization that I know, I believe in their work, I want to work with them, and they're willing to host me. We have had fellows in the past who receive the fellowship, and then it turns out the organization isn't able to host them. We have time in the spring semester to sort that out, but it does create a little bit of this scramble. If you are unsure about that process and you want to come talk to either Lee or myself, we will have office hours in January when you can do that before the deadline. So we also have networks within the faculty team. Like, I'm interested in X, Y topic and I want to go to this other place. We may know something. Maybe I'll suggest some of this for them.
Would you like to elaborate on direct service?
Yeah, so as Lee said, the fellowship is really designed to be two things, right? You are proposing your fellowship experience. This is really a capstone experience for students that have done community engaged leadership development work at Duke. So you have a lot of agency in designing that experience. We want you to be placed with an organization that can make good use of the skills, talents, and experiences that you're bringing. Often they have some project that you can work on that's more in the vein of direct service. So you're directly engaging with populations or participants in that organization. And you're also doing community engaged research, which I'll talk about once. The direct service can be lots of different things. We've had folks work in healthcare context, in social service context, organizing context. We have this year's fellows, we have a fellow here in Durham who's working with Durham County Public Library, Sophia Chabanda, who is doing a research project in the archives. So Sophia has her own research project that she's doing, and at the same time she's engaging in the archival programs of the library. So she's taking archives out to communities, doing participatory archival research that's really exciting. So a little bit of both hands. If you got specific questions, they're like, I think this is an organization I might want to work with, but I don't know what the direct service component would be, we can talk that through. But we do want you to be thinking, how can I be embedded and immersed in a community ways that are both service to that community, where you can be with them, and also develop a research project that's going to be responsive to the questions that they're asking for themselves, and give you some agency and activity to build the research over the course of time. Community-based research. What do we mean by this term? So, how many of you have had an experience to do so far that you would qualify as like a research experience? Okay. Hopefully you're all seniors, or so this is like good that you, by the time you get to your senior year, you have a research experience. Some research that we do at Duke is lab research or peer research. Some of it qualifies as community engaged research. What we mean by that is that it's research in which you're collaborating with a community that is directly impacted by or concerned about the issue that the question that you're asking. There are ways to do this well, there are ways to do this badly. There's a long history of people doing this very badly in an exploitative, unethical, or extractive way. We try really hard in this, like the purpose of this fellowship program is to set up some parameters to support you to do this well and ethically, mindfully engage in participatory research. What that means is that we want you to be we want your research questions to emerge from both your own interest, what are you curious about in the world at this point, and questions that are driven by the communities you're working with. So, again, to go back to Sophia's example, here in Durham, a particular sort of interest from the North Carolina collection of archives at the public library about the history of LGBTQ organizing in Durham, matched with kind of Sophia's own research interest, and so that's the source of that project. Now that comes out of a conversation that you will have with your community partner if you're selected as a fellow from February to June. You want to build that research question yourself. The faculty and support team at the fellowship has, we do 2 orientations in which we guide you through some steps on how to build a great research question, how to conduct ethical community-based research. Typically the research is actually happening in the second half of your fellowship. So the first half, July through July through December, is more just kind of getting to know your community, being with the organizations where you're working, doing the direct service work that they've engaged you to do. And then the second half, January through the following June, is really your research half. That's not a hard and fast rule, but that tends to be how we structure that. We have 2 research support folks. So Professor Kate Wetton and Professor Pete Wong, who I think you're going to talk a little bit about them in a moment. They are both researchers here at Duke who have long histories of doing community engaged research in global health contexts. They've really thought hard about this. And so they are your guides through the ethical and practical questions of that. And then we also ask each fellow to identify a Duke faculty member who is your research advisor. So you're getting a lot of faculty support, someone that you've chosen for your own project. The 2, in addition to myself, 3 research faculty who are supporting you, and then hopefully also someone in your community organization yourself and directing research. Can I pause to ask for questions about the community-based research piece of this specifically?
Is there a way that your direct service and your research are the same? Like you're doing service via one sustained research project?
Potentially. Absolutely. Again, it entirely depends on the organization you're working with and what they've articulated as their highest need or their need that you can best join with. So yeah, sometimes the service and research is the same. So for example, last year, Anjali Gupta, who was based at the University of the Gambia doing research around breast cancer screening, that was both direct service and research at the same time. So there's a service point of screening folks who are coming in for sort of risk assessments, and also doing some research around the barriers to access for that kind of thing.
Can you talk a little bit more about what the expectations are for the faculty mentor and how to know what to look for in a faculty mentor?
Yeah, we're actually adding some structure to this. It's been a little loosey-goosey in the past. So the basic expectation is that faculty mentor is reading your research proposal and giving you feedback at the beginning of the project, meeting with you monthly over the course of the project and advising you, and then reading and giving feedback on your final project. Now, the final project doesn't have to be a research paper. It can be like defined by the partner organization. But you want to pick somebody who knows something about the topic that you're working on. Sometimes they actually have connections to the organization that you're working with. Right? So a lot of faculty have connections around the globe in the research areas. But yeah, they're reading your work, they're meeting with you monthly.
Should we be thinking about IRB at all during this process?
Yes, you should. So all Hart Fellowship community-based research projects are subject to IRB. So you will need to go through the IRB process. We guide you through that. You get a lot of support on that. We're doing that right now with all 3 projects this year.
That's like after they're selected.
Yeah,
like
you don't have to go. No, you don't have to go before. Because you won't know at this point.
Generally, like in this first half of your fellowship is where you're kind of refining what the research is going to look like. So I think our general goal is to have IRB submitted like end of October, mid-November.
Yeah, about that. Also, because I'm already doing a thesis project on the community organization that I've been working with for some time, and so so for example, like, is it okay if we like continue doing like thesis projects, for example, and also continue to work with the same organization through this fellowship?
So you're asking about continuing work with somebody you worked with during your senior thesis research, or just in the past in general?
During my senior thesis research.
Yeah, that's totally fine.
Okay.
Right? It's not required, but if you have an existing relationship and you're already working on a project that's meaningful, that's important. I think we'll ask some questions about what's the nature of that project and how you've approached it in the past that will help us understand how you might approach it going forward and if there's any shifts there. But yeah, if you've got an existing connection, that's fine. Okay.
Great. All right, reflective practice. So this is kind of a core piece of all the Hart leadership programs that we run. So we have 3 undergraduate programs that we run, and then this is the postgraduate program. For the fellows specifically, there are kind of, we've written 4, but it's kind of an endless amount of opportunity for critical reflection. So first we have research updates. Each month we will ask you to submit some kind of reflection on your research and the direction that it's headed, so that way you can continue to refine your goals. This is especially important in the fall, the summer and fall, where you're really figuring out what is the project that you want to engage in and how will it impact the community partner that you're working with. These research updates are submitted to all of the Hart faculty and staff who work on the fellowship, and you will receive notes back, feedback to help you refine your research goals. In addition to this, we also have the Letters Home. Letters Home are an opportunity for you to just reflect on your experience. It doesn't have to be focused on your research. It can be interpersonal. How am I getting along with the people in my community organization? How am I feeling about living in this new place? How am I navigating what it's like to be a recent graduate and trying to make friends and exist in this new community? And anything in between.
Yeah. The Letters Home are an old practice of the Hart Leadership Program. I know some of you have done Letters Home in the past. So those get responded to by a member of the Hart Leadership faculty. I think it's going to be Professor Suzanne Katzenstein this year. So you get like really thoughtful, engaged letters. Typically they are, the letters you get in response are as long as the letters that you sent. And they're not your typical kind of academic writing. We go through how we want you to think about this exercise. The idea is that by the end, you're going to have both the letters that you sent and the letters that you received back as a kind of treasure trove for yourself in the future, in which you've recorded the experiences and memories and learnings that are happening as they are happening, and then you also have this dialogue partner who's helping with reflection. So it's a pretty important part. We spend a lot of time talking with letters. They are, I think, really some of the best learning of the fellowship. We talk about this fellowship a lot as service and research. It's also your first year, potentially your first or second year after graduation. So much growth happens, so much discernment happens in that year. The Letters Home are the place where a lot of that discernment can happen in partnership.
Right. And so those letters home are private. They're just sent to 1 or 2 people on the team who will respond to you. But then in addition to that, you'll also have monthly updates where you kind of give an update not only on your research, but your direct service and just how your month is going overall. And then finally, we have monthly gatherings with all the fellows and everyone on the faculty and staff team. And those are an opportunity for mindful reflection, processing, checking in with each other. And we hold little workshops as well to help you kind of think through different issues that are coming up.
Yeah, there's some workshops that we do every year, and there's some workshops that we tailor to the particular interest of the group that year. This is really cohort building. Since the fellows are, it's a smaller group, right? It tends to be 3 fellows per year, give or take. But we want to build some spirit of groupness among those 3. And since you're scattered across the globe, you come together for that monthly reflection and also get some. The workshops tend to be staged in September we did one around applying to graduate school. With that, we'll do one in January or February around what happens after the fellowship. You sort of find a job if you're that next step.
And the other thing too is that these monthly gatherings are really helpful because for many of our fellows, their core community from Duke are doing something completely different post-grad. Most people are working as consultants or making money in some other way, and our fellows are engaged in essentially community service and community-based research. So it's a different thing. So to be able to bond with your peers who are kind of experiencing not necessarily the same things, but a similar track can be very useful. So speaking of our support team, there are 6 kind of core members. Of course, there's Professor Durkin and myself. We also have Professor Kate Wetton and He Huyen, who are our research advisors. Then we have Professor Suzanne Katzenstein, who is the writing coach. She is predominantly responding to your letters home and attending those monthly gatherings. And then we have Kiana Boston, who is the finance manager for our leadership program, and Kiana just make sure that your money is flowing correctly. Yeah, any additions there?
No, that's right.
All right, so some details. For our application timeline, you will apply online by Wednesday, January 17th, end of day. At this point, when you apply, everything needs to be submitted. So on the application, you'll see that we request a few things to be emailed directly to us, transcripts and a letter of recommendation. That also, those things need to be in by January 17th. On Wednesday, January 31st, so 2 weeks later, we'll identify our finalists and notify them. If you are a finalist, you will be invited to interview. That will happen the second week of February, the 7th through the 14th. Those are just 30-minute interviews for us to have a little bit of more detailed conversation about your proposal. Final offers will be made by Friday, February 16th, and you have 2 weeks to let us know if you've accepted your position as a Hart Fellow. And then in late March or early April, we will have an orientation weekend where all of our fellows gather together to receive some important instruction about what to expect, how to approach their fellowship, and to just generally prepare for that July 1st launch date. Ideally, the fellowship will begin July 1st and finish at the end of April. So it's good to just kind of have that in mind if you are thinking about going somewhere internationally and you need to apply for a visa. Make sure you're thinking about this early on. So we'll cover that in the orientation weekend, but that's just an important note in general when you're putting together your application. If you're thinking about going abroad, make sure that that is a country that is not on the Duke restricted regions list, and also a place that you could ideally get a visa to go.
There's also one more date that's not up here, which is we do 2 orientations. One is that sort of late March, early April orientation weekend. We then reconvene after graduation. So you will need to stay on campus a couple days after commencement. You reconvene again, and that's more orientation stuff. We really want you to be prepared when you head out. The visa stuff is really important. So we want you to really think through when you're picking a location, requesting a location, what are the visa implications for you in particular? Obviously nothing on the restricted regions list, but also is it a country where you might have a harder time gaining a visa depending on your particular circumstance. If you've got questions about that, come talk to us. We will help you think through that. It is ultimately, and I can't emphasize this enough, it is ultimately your responsibility to obtain the visa for your travel. So we can be a support. Duke has a global travel office that can be a support, but we can't obtain the visa for you.
Right, so we can share a letter with you that says that we are sponsoring your fellowship, that you'll have funding, and that you'll leave at the end of your fellowship, but ultimately, like, getting the visa is dependent on you. Okay, go ahead.
How flexible is the July start date?
We can go later, but not earlier. So we've had fellows start as late as September for a variety of reasons. What we try to do, and this is not a hard and fast rule, we try to make sure that 10 months occurs sometime in between July 1st and the following June 30th, so a fiscal year. That's for accounting reasons. We can't give you a stipend before July 1st.
And the goal there also is that if you're planning to go to grad school after your fellowship, you kind of have some time to adjust back to life as usual and process your fellowship. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, in terms of visa as well, because I'm an international student, and so, for example, if I were to propose, this is my the grassroots organization planning to work with is mostly based in the U.S. but also transnationally, and so if I'm staying in the U.S., how is my legal status going to be if I enter this fellowship?
Yeah, so this is where like every particular situation is a little different. Because you would not technically be an employee, potentially not be an employee of that organization, again, it's an organization, nor an employee of Duke. There are a lot of considerations around who's actually sponsoring your visa. Duke does not sponsor visas for postgraduates on the fellowship. So what I would say is come talk to us and we can think through. You might also seek the advice of the global travel office, or the visa office that you've been working with. But you would not, your visa status would change.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so we're almost at the end here, but just to give you a quick preview of the application. The application is live, so I'm not sure if you've had the chance to look at it already. But on that first page, there's just some biographical information that we're collecting about you. And then once you proceed to the second page, you'll see our essay question responses. So first, we'll ask you for a 750-word fellowship proposal. This is kind of where you're digging into your passion, potential community partners, and just your goal for the year. There are also a few short essay responses where we're just trying to get to know you a little bit more. And then other components are your resume, official transcripts, and a letter of recommendation. All three of those need to be emailed to the Hart Fellowship email inbox. And then we also request 2 references who we will contact in the case that you become a finalist at the interview with us. All right, now I'm going to open it up for questions. And if you have a question that you don't feel comfortable asking, feel free to email our Hart Fellowship inbox, or you can go ahead and schedule office hours if need, and you can find that information on the Hart Leadership website. But what are your questions?
I guess I'd be curious to hear like what criteria you'd recommend thinking about when we're sort of thinking about what makes the ideal host organization. So should we be looking for organizations that like cross the line between service and research, or if there's sort of one and not the other, there's sort of ways to supplement the other even if it's not under the organization itself? How to think about that?
I can take a stab at that. So in general, you'll be receiving a lot of research support from the Hart leadership team and from your faculty mentor. So working with, like when you're looking for your organization, finding an organization that's really plugged into the topic or issue that you're passionate about, I think is going to be a good place to start.
Yeah, I think that's right. I would focus more on finding an organization that is doing work that you believe in and care about and want to join and be part of and can learn from. An organization that has a record, this can be a little bit hard to judge, but an organization that you feel like you're going to get support in. They've got some record of hosting interns or fellows, been around for a little bit, has some, not necessarily scale, but size, and that is deeply embedded in the community. Large international aid organizations, the origin of this program in the mid-90s was we only worked with Save the Children. We've only sent Hart Fellows to conflict zones in Eastern Europe and Sub-Saharan Africa. So we don't do that anymore. No conflict zones. But I think the large international aid organizations may not be the best fit. We're going to find a really good vetting organization that's hard and fast rule. But I wouldn't worry as much about finding a research organization unless you know very specifically that you want to do healthcare-based research. In that case, you probably do want an organization that has some history or record of doing thoughtful, ethical global health research.
I came in a little late, so I might have missed this, but what are the rules, I guess, around wherever your host location is? Are you allowed to travel outside of the location?
The question is, can the fellow travel outside of the host location? So we discourage it, right? And especially if you're outside, if you are a U.S. citizen or lived in the United States for a long time and you're traveling outside the U.S. and you consider the U.S. a place where you're home. Because part of the point is cultural humility and community immersion. To really be in and with a place for a long time. We've done 10 months actually isn't that long. So we've historically had somewhat of a rule around not coming, if consider the United States your home and you go to another country, not coming back over the course of those 10 months. We're not totally hard and fast about that anymore because there are reasons why people might need to go back for medical emergencies or family stuff, but we really discourage it. We also discourage tourist travel while you're in country, or traveling to another country in the general region. We want you to really be in that place for 2 months.
Kind of on that note, and what you said before, there aren't many fellows who have done work in their home community. Can you guys explain maybe what are things you would or wouldn't like about a proposal that's close to someone's home, and I guess just that.
Okay. Again, I think this is not a hard and fast rule. So this was an international only fellowship, non-US based fellowship for most of its history. And it's only within the past 3 or 4 years that we've supported US based programs. There's some reasoning behind both of those choices. I think for something that feels very close to home, what we would still want to see is that, so I had a mentor who used to use the phrase creative dislocation, right? That you will be challenged enough and dislocated enough that you have a growth opportunity. Now, we also want to see you do committed work that you care about with organizations that you trust, and so sometimes those can be in creative tension. But one of the purposes of the fellowship from a learning and growth perspective is for you to be uncomfortable, for you to intentionally put yourself in situations where you're going to receive challenges to your perspective on the world, your sense of self, the way in which you think communities operate, how social change happens, the ways in which you understand the policy or public issue that you're working. We want those to be hard issues for you. So if you can show us that going to a community where you have lived and you have long relationships and working with an organization that you know will still do that, I think we're totally open to it. But I think living with family is going to be maybe harder. It's not, again, everybody's context and situations.
I had a question in terms that's kind of like based on your interactions with people who completed the fellowship. And I think especially considering the pressure that a lot of graduates receive to like kind of go a traditional route of going into entry-level roles, even if that's not private sector, but just like going into entry-level roles in larger organizations. I guess like thinking of that as like, I guess the traditional option and thinking of this as like an alternative to that, what do you think is something that we might not expect that's a benefit of completing the fellowship based on like the relationships you built with the people in the program?
That's a great question. We already gave an answer to this too. I'll say two things about this. So one benefit is that, as you said, the traditional path, I would challenge it a little bit, but like, let's take for a second, like the traditional path is you're gonna get an entry-level job in consulting, finance, tech, and that's what law school is, right? So this isn't that. And one of the nice parts about that is that you will have greater responsibility. When we say direct service, we don't mean you're the office assistant of the organization. In fact, that's not a project we use. We want you to have meaningful, substantive work, which you're getting direct interaction with people who are leading meaningful change in the world. So you get that kind of agency and responsibility. You're also running your own research project alongside other people, so that's maybe distinctive. Those will ultimately, I don't want to be too mercenary about it, because we want you to do this because we want you to apply because you want the experience, not because you want the resume. I will say it's a distinguished fellowship, and it does look good on a resume. In part because what you can then say is, here's this research project that I did, and that's going to be impressive. And here's this meaningful set of skills that I developed because I was working with an NGO in some place that empowered me to do this cool work. And then when you're ready to do your next thing, you can point to that, and that's going to be really cool. The other thing I'd say is you're joining a network of fellows, and we're really actively trying to build the alumni network here, of more than 120 people who've had this fellowship over the past 30 years. Some of those first fellows are now running very large international organizations. That's not to say that it's a guaranteed track, but a lot of folks end up going into either leadership in the nonprofit sector or the NGO sector, government service, or to law school as well. And I think it's a great preparation.
Are there things in place to ensure that fellows who complete the 10 months are still in touch with the communities that they've worked with? Or, because you said that like you try to kind of move away from that extractive kind of research in different locations. But so like what are ways that I guess Hart Fellows that you've seen them stay in contact with the?
So the question is, how do we support Hart Fellows in staying in touch with their communities after the fellowship?
Yeah.
So, at that point, it's somewhat up to you. Because ideally, what you're doing over this course of this 10 months is building authentic, true relationships for yourself. We don't actually have the relationships, we have relationships. And so if you stay in touch with them, and we want you to, that's because you've developed meaningful relationships, or because your research is having some cultural impact. I know that there are fellows who have stayed in long-term contact with their host partners or with organizations they work with. It's not something that we require, and we couldn't even enforce it. Do you have a follow-up?
No. Yeah. But I will go back to your question about like what are some of the benefits of this non-traditional route. And two things came to mind when you were asking that. The first is that this is a great opportunity to explore something that might be harder to access later on. So once you kind of get on that track that you're working in a corporate company and you're kind of going to your 9 to 5, it's a lot harder to kind of jump off that, I don't want to call it a conveyor belt, but it can be a little bit difficult to jump off and go back into potentially like a, I don't know, type of work that you're not making as much money, or is like less structured, less, has less prestige, although this has prestige as well. So that's kind of one thing, is it's a great opportunity to explore something in this period of transition where you're figuring out where you're going to go next in life. The second thing is that as a fellow, you are having so many new experiences that your emotional maturity and the lessons that you learn are going to kind of propel you ahead of your peers, I think. You have access to deep mentorship from not only your community partner organization, but the Hart Fellow leadership team and your peers. And you're you're experiencing so many things, like you'll learn resilience, you'll learn budgeting on a small pay. There's so many things that you're going to learn that are just very useful life skills. And to do that in the network of support from the Hart Fellowship team, I think is just
I also have a question on the site as well, because for example, if my organization has a location is based in both New York City and LA and requires me to travel across these places, how's that going to look like for the travel part of it?
Yeah.
I think you might be able to build that into your budget. That's definitely not out of the question. We have a fellow right now, Ben Smith, who is working predominantly based in Seattle, but has to travel to DC every now and then for different conferences. Wynn is supporting that out of his budget that he built with the fellowship. But it's specifically work travel, right?
Yeah, I think it's totally part of something you'd want to consider as you build budget. The one caution I might have is that when you're thinking about location, really high cost of living cities like New York and Los Angeles, and we've been seeing this in Seattle, it just puts additional constraints on it, right? Because there is a not there. It's just something to weigh when you're thinking about possible.
How do you recommend going about finding small grassroots organizations in countries that might not speak the language and who are a little bit more difficult?
It entirely depends on the country, right? So, it really depends. So if you're talking about, we had last year, Lizzie Kramer was in Mexico, right? So. Had some Spanish language facility, developed Spanish language fluency through language school, so that we've actually worked with an organization that we had some connection to. But it's a country that we don't necessarily have connections in. A lot of that is going to be just web research or potentially accessing other faculty around doing connections. So that's a case where I would suggest bring your specific idea to lead.
So if I were to apply with a country in mind, but I couldn't find an organization, I would get help finding an organization that matches what I'm interested in.
Yeah, I think if you have a clear idea of what you're looking to do, a clear passion, and a clear region of the world or country, I would do some research, of course, to see what exists already. We would also ask you to identify who your faculty advisor would be for this application. So reach out to them. And you can also reach out to us during your application process. You can tell me if I'm right. To ask if we have contacts in that region. Yeah. Another resource that's available to you is on the Hart Leadership website. We have a student project database, and that has the community partner organizations that our fellows, as well as our undergraduate program fellows, have worked with in the past. So you can go ahead and you can filter by region of the world or by topic of interest. That goes back to 2011. But we also have archives going back to the 90s, so we can, definitely help you find somebody. Any other questions?
What if a place is currently on the restricted regions list, but you are hopeful that it won't be by the time the fellowship begins?
Sure. It's hard to predict what is going to happen in the world. So I think if you propose a place that's on the restricted region list currently, we would want to see in your application some strong argumentation for why you can anticipate that status will change between now and July. I just, fair warning, it'll get a little bit more scrutiny from us, just because we want to make sure, like, what we wouldn't want to do is be in a position where we're awarding the fellowship because suddenly the country of your choice is going to not have whatever has caused it to be on the restricted region list, and then that doesn't change. You then have to switch your
I think ideally, if that were the case, you would have kind of in your application a secondary location or a secondary organization. There are some organizations that have headquarters in multiple countries, right? You might have a place that you really want to go, but you're not sure it will be available to you, but you could work in this other country that's like fine.
Thanks.
If your research requires you to be is working in the local language and you don't have complete fluency, can you use either part of your cost of living expense or the research stipend to have like a local counterpart working with you?
As a translator? So there's $200 for language training, which is typically just for like an immersion school. Probably wouldn't cover that. You would, I think, want to build that into your research budget. Yeah, I'm sure that has happened.
I'm thinking like, for example, I'm thinking of a project in Bolivia where I may speak Spanish, but then if you're going into a more remote location where they speak Quechua, like I might not be able to navigate that.
Yeah, that would make total sense. I think we would still want you to do language immersion courses while you're there if that's available. But you could also control.
Hi, first of all, thank you both so much for this. It's been lovely. I have two questions. The first being that if you're wanting to apply to a country, say Germany, where you have proficiency in one of the national languages but the other, is that something that's considered within your application? And secondly, as someone who's hoping to pursue a community-based research project in a country experiencing conflict, I know that there are some restrictions on the travel list of like portions of countries. How do you go about navigating that? Like, do you literally like recommend just looking at Google Maps and seeing which projects don't like align with that part of the country? How do you, what guidance on that?
I only heard part of that, so.
So I think the first question was, if there's a country where you are fluent in one of the languages but not the other dominant language, that's fine. Yeah. And we certainly have had fellows go to countries where they don't have any, we want to have some facility with the language, like you don't want to, that would just be really difficult. That's a real creative dislocation. But I think the situation you described is fine. And then the second question was, if the whole country isn't on the restricted regions list, but just a portion, we would need to be assured that your work and presence would only be in the portion that was not on the restricted regions list.
I think there might even be rules about like how many miles away from that zone you need to be.
Okay, thank you.
In the interest of time, I'm going to stop questions here. Feel free, again, to schedule office hours, to email us, or I'll stick around for a few minutes if you have something quick. But here is the link to the application. This is also on our website, on our Instagram. If you don't already follow us on Instagram, or if you're not on our Instagram, please sign up for the newsletter and follow us on Instagram. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming.
Quick question about the application. Is there a place to see like all the questions without
The best way right now is to just click through the second page of the application to see the questions, but I'll also be adding a tab on the website.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.